When we end up talking more about the business part of the independent practices, happy to dispel that myth as well overall. A lot of the physicians who are on the board with me will say, I'm happier, I give better patient care, I work less hours. I'm going to say the thing that we're not supposed to say out loud. I'm making way more.
There's no way you are going to know how to do this, a Fertility Network CEO said to my guest, Dr. Shvetha Zarek. Talk about a way to motivate an REI. Dr. Zarek is the owner of Arbor Fertility in St. Louis. She and other colleagues founded the Alliance of Independent Reproductive Endocrinologists, which they call AIRE. I think you should pronounce it AIRE. Let's get that to stick. Dr. Zarek quotes her colleague, Dr. Barry Rips, when she says, independence matters. Dr. Zarek discusses myths that are told to fertility physicians, like the myth of maintaining clinical control while handing over operational responsibilities, and the myth that large corporate IVF operations have lower costs than independently owned centers. She explains how independent REIs actually make more money when they own their practice. She talks about her experience working for Oma Fertility, a venture capital-backed group that went out of business quickly, and how the leadership of that organization knew what was going on, but withheld that information from their physicians. Dr. Zarek had also worked for Integramed. So I talk about a firm called GeneScreen, used by all kinds of fertility practices, including several independent practices, because they need a key resource, especially for something like genetics, when you can't have a big team just on your own as an independent center, but you can access one like you do, like GeneScreen. Dr. Zarek asks me if practice owners that maintain ownership of their clinic but sold their lab count as independent. Whose argument do you side with? That of my awesome friends, Dr. John Storment and Dr. Neil Chappell, or that of the rising star, Dr. Talia Siegel? Tell us what you think. Are you an independent practice owner if you held on to the clinic but sold the lab? And enjoy this conversation about what Dr. Shvetha Zarek calls a breaking point in corporate medicine. If you like the information in this episode, we're compiling so much more data on new technology in IVF, products, services, market analyses, info on mergers and acquisitions, and data on every company in the fertility space. Go to data.insidereproductivehealth.com. If your company isn't an IVF Heroes Universe sponsor, your competitors are so much more visible to your customers because we report on your category and we give that info to your customers. Go to data.insidereproductivehealth.com to learn more about other fertility companies or submit your company today. Don't be left out.
Today's advertiser helped make the production and delivery of this episode possible for free to you. But the themes expressed by the guests do not necessarily reflect the views of Inside Reproductive Health, nor of the advertiser. The advertiser does not have editorial control over the content of this episode, and the guest's appearance is not an endorsement of the advertiser.
There's a misconception about how fragmented the independent reproductive endocrinologists are. In reality, it's actually a fairly tight-knit group that's only growing. And we want to be able to talk to each other, share ideas. And, if we can streamline and help our practices, great. So there is this myth that somehow the independents aren't able to capitalize on what perhaps private networks are doing. And we're here to kind of dispel that myth and also work on kind of improving practices for us.
Tell me about what that bond is like. What is it that you all have in common?
You have to be a pretty special doctor to want to practice medicine and really enjoy the business of medicine. And I think everyone who's part of AIRE, Alliance of Independent Reproductive Endocrinologists, they enjoy both very much so. And I think we also recognize that you can't practice medicine anymore without being involved somehow with the business of it overall. And that's just simply the reality of it. I think all of us are coming with stories about previously perhaps working with private equity, venture capital, even academics. All of those are wonderful fantastic doctors, fantastic networks, but it wasn't quite fulfilling what they wanted actually really for the patient overall.
Tell me about the myths that you feel are often told either about or to practice owners. I saw on LinkedIn, I think Inside Reproductive Health had posted something, or somebody maybe from a venture capital or a private equity firm had posted, like reposted something. And I saw you jump on and say, this is BS. Practice owners are capable of A, B, and C. What are the myths that you think are often told to or about practice owners?
So we founded our practice in St. Louis about 3 years ago, and I'm about 10 years out from fellowship. I have to give a shout out to NIH, Micah Hill, and Ellen DeCherney for being incredible mentors, and as well as the incredible docs at Shady Grove and Walter Reed. It was a phenomenal program. I was at a crossroads where I could join yet again another network, or I could decide to hang my own shingle. And I remember you being really supportive with just some really small comments. You probably didn't even think about it at the time, but it had such an impact. And I had a CEO from a network tell me, well, you're going to go out on your own. There's no way you're going to know how to do this. I said, okay, game on. If you don't mind, I'd like to just give you a brief sense of my background. I am an independent doc, but I was born to an independent doc. So my mother is a internal medicine, infectious disease physician, still practicing at 70 plus. I'll just say, I don't want to give her age away, in DC. And she did it. And I watched her do it. I remember when insurance wasn't a thing and then insurance was a thing growing up. All of a sudden, as a child, I still remember that. And so living that, and my sister is also independent doc. She's in practice in Annapolis, means that I've seen it and I know it can be done. And there's a nostalgia to it. There's a nostalgia to the old school kind of small town doc, but it doesn't have to be, who takes care of their community, gives back, and the patients give to them. And I think one of the best compliments that we ever got from a couple that had been to a couple clinics and, was graduating is, he's like, you are an old school doctor. And I said, that's because I was raised by one. And so I know what I want this to feel like, and I want that back, and I didn't feel like personally we could get it again without, being able to have touch points and be able to at least get the best minds that I could to help run a practice better. And of course, we're learning a lot, but, so is everyone else overall. And so when we talk through, there are some points that the AIRE folks really want me to talk through. And I view this as, thank you for having us on. And I view myself as a representative of AIRE overall. And so there are some messages that they had that I echo that I'd love to share at some point.
I want to talk a lot about those messages, but that statement of there's no way that you're going to be able to do this, I couldn't think of anything more motivating to someone like you than to hear that. Like, that's what I would say to you if I wanted you to go off and start your own independent practice. And I think maybe that should be a recruiting statement for AIRE is, there's no way you can do this. And then that's when the younger docs will say, oh yeah, let me show you. But we are seeing a little bit of these younger docs and doctors your age who are still pretty early on in their career that are now attracted to this in ways that maybe we thought was going away 4 years ago when the pendulum had swung so far to the consolidation side. I'm hearing a lot more now, whether it's like doctors Vaughn, Bortoletto, Seidler, who I thought were going to be the generation to take over Boston IVF. They left and started their own thing. Or people like Dr. Siegel, who I see is on your AIRE board that is growing in the Bay Area, and yourself that used to be part of a VC-backed group, now doing it with yourself as the entrepreneur. Why is that happening as far as you can tell? Maybe that relates to what your AIRE colleagues wanted you to communicate, but why are we seeing this pendulum swing back somewhat?
Great question. I'd like to give credit to another AIRE board member, Barry Rips. And I wanted to say that, we have more senior folks that we have a lot to learn from. semi-retired, locums folks. That's all part of AIRE, and to them, they said, and if you don't mind, I'm going to actually read what he said because it's so great. He said, independence matters. Our physician members retain full autonomy over both clinical and business decisions, allowing them to keep the physician-patient relationship and patient outcomes at the center of every decision they make. Simply put, our bottom line remains the patient, not shareholders or corporate interests. And I do think that there is a difference working and being a patient at an independent practice that to me is palpable. I can tell you how it affects our practice that I don't think you will get with more bureaucracy.
What is the type of bureaucracy that docs can run into in other environments? And what is the agency specifically that independent owners have to get around that?
Right. Great question. And I think the answer to that is actually a question to you and your audience is, does everyone really think that separating clinical medicine can be done if the staffing, vending, purchasing, insurance reimbursements are all decided by someone else in the practice, in the clinic, in the network? Do we really think that is true? And I think most physicians would say, absolutely not. If we can't help control staffing, then how can we really help quality of care overall? And that is probably the most tangible difference that I see between an independent practice and one that is not, is that when you take away that decision making from the physician, and not just the physician, because we know that reproductive endocrinology is a team sport for sure, then you really are affecting patient quality of care and outcomes.
I 100%. I say that so frequently that you can't divorce clinical decisions from operational decisions. They are interwoven. And in one side of the mouth, people will say, oh, we don't have anything to do with clinical decisions. But they'll also say in the same breath, patient experience is clinical care. The staff, team, that is clinical care. Well, which one of those is it? And I think that's a challenge that a lot of the networks have faced, which isn't to say that sometimes I do think that fine, like go ahead and make the decisions. And there is something to be said for that scalability. I really admire Dr. Kshitsit Murdia. He's the CEO of Indira IVF, which is one of the largest networks in India. He's got like 400 OBGYNs. They basically agree to one protocol or one specific set of protocols. They all do it. He hires doctors that are younger than him and says, this is what we're doing. And I think they agreed to it together, but or at least at the top, but that's what they're doing. I really admire Beth Zonarike, CEO of Pinnacle, who says, sometimes I'm unpopular because I say these are the best practices that we've determined and we have to scale care. I appreciate that honesty. And I think there is a space for that. What I think people get in trouble with is when they want to tell themselves, yeah, I'll be the boss still. And no, you won't. You're selling your practice. You ain't the boss anymore. And so it sounds like one of the things that you've really thought about. Is there a specific example, like a specific staffing decision or a specific software, a specific operational implementation that you can think of that it's like that's someone else has been hampered or I was hampered in that in a different environment that I was able to do differently in my position now?
Great question. I think it really does come always down to the people and the care team. So if someone says we don't have the FTEs to add another nurse when you're growing and you certainly need that, and no, we cannot offer any version of after hours care, which is what I was faced with in doing IVF as an IVF director in academics. That's a problem for REI overall. And I will say, that's a great point. And, we applaud all the different other entities. I think it's important that everyone plays well together. And so my message or our message is that we have to be able to learn from each other. So not to really put to any sort of adversarial relationship with it, because there's a lot to learn from each other. Best practices, absolutely. There are things that probably could be standardized, that should be, that really need to be overall. But that said, don't you think spending, your time and your career in this space that REI is full of folks who are curious and thinking through how to do things better and need the freedom to be able to think about that a little bit and continue to innovate. That is what I love about our subspecialty, is that because, at least ART is only 48 years old. Louise and Brown and I, our birthdays are 9 days apart. So I always remember how old IVF is. We've gotten where we are, which is an incredible pace in the last 48 years because of people who did it differently. Are we stymieing that? And that's why I think there is a real, need for the independent practices who have the freedom to say, let's try this. And I can't think of any other type of business setting where they really do have to think about the bottom line. Because sure, the margins may be thinner, maybe. When we end up talking more about the business part of the independent practices, I'm happy to dispel that myth as well overall. In that I think a lot of the physicians who are on the board with me, I'll give a shout out to Dr. Sweldo in Florida. She's absolutely rocking it. Will say, I'm happier. I give better patient care. I work less hours, sometimes, not always as a business owner. I'm going to say the thing that we're not supposed to say out loud. I'm making way more.
I really appreciated when Dr. Tobler said that from Idaho Center of Reproductive Medicine. They had been an Integramed group. After Integramed dissolved, they did not go with the new entity. They remained independent, and I brought all three of those partners on to ask them why. And I remember Dr. Tobler saying, I think it was when he was back at Park City, they brought in an independent doc that was just like, hey, guys, if you are doing it yourself, there is so much more financial opportunity for you. And that still seems to be true. Is that as true as it would have been 10 or 20 years ago in your view?
I'll speak specifically for our geo in Missouri because it's not state mandated, that it is absolutely true where we are. Now, we are neighbors to Illinois and we have a Southern Illinois office. And so we see both payer mix and self-pay. But I think compared to my colleagues at Arbor Fertility, who are all kind of insurance mandated, it's a different practice. And I think we can help each other even though the business part of it is quite different. Kristen, Kevin, Kyle, so Dr. Tobler, Dr. Moss, Dr. Slater of Idaho are part of AIRE. They're a phenomenal group. My first position out of fellowship was in Integramed, and I lived through that. And so them saying, let's go out on our own is incredible. I think they're a really good example of how to do it well. I did attend ASRM's Business of Medicine conference in Chicago that happened quite recently. It was in conjunction with CFAS. Big shout out to both those teams. They did a phenomenal job. And what I learned from listening to some of the leaders who spoke about being part of the corporate network in terms of numbers is that on an annual basis, likely the independents at least take home are about 3 to 4 times revenue. So whatever salary they're given, right, there's at least, 3/4 of that that's going to whoever they're part of. And, we can all choose and I think some folks run their practice better and more efficiently. That is true. That's true for what, at least personally we're doing. But most of that goes back into investment into our team, our people, our infrastructure. But it's absolutely true. And to have the freedom to say, okay, what are we going to do with this pot? It's great. I don't really know, and this is going to be an existential crisis that we're kind of seeing is with the profit margins, especially if you're taking insurance, getting smaller and smaller and smaller. How are we going to be able to have a layer of administration one after the other all the way through, right? And still be profitable? I mean, I didn't even look at the books. We were just focused on providing really good care, getting our messaging, our branding, who we are, what we're all about out for the first 2 years. And all of a sudden we were like, whoa, I had no idea that's what the annual revenue is going to be. I think that if these patients who are in such a vulnerable place are giving us sometimes life savings to build their family, those funds should stay local and help the community back. And so I work in different kind of opportunities with private equity, let's say, I do. And there's nothing wrong with that. But locally, I want to be able to practice independent. I want that to stay here because we do give it back. We do. It's just part of it. Maybe I don't think it's just a Midwest thing. But that's part of, kind of, at least for St. Louis, it's a very proud city about how we give back to the community. So
independent centers need infrastructure and resources in order to be able to succeed and thrive in these environments. They need people that can help with patient experience, with providing personalized care, not being a one size fits all experience. People like gene screen, because as genetics becomes more complex, even the best fertility teams need support. They need help with those really complex questions and answers. Gene Screen works alongside your team, fertility centers of all kinds, academic network, and many, many independently owned fertility centers as an extension of their practice. They provide concierge genetic counseling. They help patients better understand their options, and they help clinicians make more informed decisions. Give your patients the personalized genetic support they expect without adding a further layer of complexity to your workflow. Visit gene-screen, that's gene-screen. You can ask me, I'll make the intro, but gene-screen.com to get in touch with the folks at Gene Screen. Is AIRE going to become something that provides some kind of, administrative or collective buying power? Is that part of what you all are forming right now, so that you can go through this insurance payer changing landscape together?
yes, it's not necessarily the primary goal, but absolutely. And part of the reason why that question is more challenging, because as you know, payer and insurance reimbursement is very specific to the state. And so we are looking at how other specialties and other independent practices have managed to do this successfully. But what we're hoping to do is say, hey, I have this challenge. Let's say staffing. That's a big one that comes up all the time. How are you finding good people to work with, being independent, maybe not having a bigger budget? And, everyone talks about their solution. And I don't think you can do this when an independent doctor. They want choice. That's why they are on their own, so to speak, And so let's say we go, okay, we vetted these 3 vendors for X service. I can tell you that AIRE is really focused on finding independent vendors. We are now seeing who owns what. Actually, our clinic just moved what we were using for medical supplies because we realized that they had been somewhat recently purchased by KKR. Not really our thing, great people that we work with, but that's not what like to do. We'd like to still focus on something that helps the people that we know are built relationships with. It's all about the relationships. So that is really more the goal. So not quite an MSO, but really a guide.
One of the things that we want to do, we have been updating our database of practices and who owns each of them, how many are independently owned and how many are owned by different networks and how many are academic. We want to do the same thing on the vendor side. We have the vendor side companies, but we've never gone into their cap table to organize it. I think that's going to be one of the things that comes next for that reason. People want to see which pharmacies are still independently owned, which other vendors are still independently owned, and which are owned maybe by my competitors or by a large capital risk firm or something like that. You worked for a venture capital backed fertility center in the past. To what extent are you comfortable sharing your experience and what you learned from that?
I'm quite comfortable. Obviously, everything I say is my experience and my opinion with it. But sure, happy to. And I'm happy to kind of talk through the evolution of working for IntegraMed. And then I was in academics, and I thought, I'm really a private practice doc. So, academics was fantastic, but it really wasn't quite what I was looking for. And so at least the impetus of looking at venture capital was that I thought, okay, I'm not quite ready to have my own center, but this may be a nice solution and for kind of what I was looking for, which was to really provide more affordable care with, what we do.
What happened in those situations that you would advise other doctors to be on the lookout for?
Sure. So the origin story is that I got connected to a recruiter And they were looking to find doctors who, would be willing to join. And this venture capital was OMA. And OMA was interested in doing more affordable ART, which, really spoke to me. They were looking for medical directors and they wanted to build de novo clinics across the country. And I think you had them on the podcast too, the three owners. And they also were interested in doing more tech. And all of those, I think, are really great goals overall. I did go into it with a good amount of homework that we had done because I hadn't worked with venture capital and I don't have that financial background enough to say I really truly understand the differences. But luckily, we had a family friend here who grew up here, but then had really done very well in San Francisco in the VC world. And then ultimately decided he and his wife are both from here, wanted to raise their family here. And he said, this is the one thing about venture capital. He said, they are going to make their decisions quickly. And if they are not going to continue, they're going to pull the plug. And you just have to be ready for that. So I knew what I was getting into overall. This story with OMA was a bit of a unique experience because they got kind of intertwined with Silicon Valley Bank, which I think really just was kind of their part of their demise. The part that I think is really difficult there were 5 physicians across the country and, we still keep in touch overall and everyone kind of had a different kind of exit story was that, they knew this was going on and they didn't tell us about it, which is really just kind of embarrassing that, my colleagues in the area, my colleagues nationally all knew what was happening to our clinics, but we didn't know it. And that was hard. That was hard to swallow.
Doctors Tobler and Moss and Slater relayed sort of a similar experience with Integramed. Actually, Dr. Lauren Johnson, I believe, laid a similar experience with Integramed on the show. And it's not to say that everyone's going to do that to you. It's to say that at the end of the day, if you're in business with other people, you are subject to what other people might do. And if you're in business for yourself or with some partners that maybe you know really, really, really well who are in the same situation, that's a much different level of control than folks that you might not know what they're going to do. And I think what Dr. Johnson said about her partners at Carolina Conceptions was, I know who's across the table from me. I know their families. I know who they are. I know that what their values are. And I just don't think that you can understate that as an advantage.
I totally agree. And the patients have gotten really savvy as they should. And they've gotten savvy because unfortunately they've been through the ringer the stories of fertility clinics opening and closing has always been true. That's what I'm realizing. There have been lots of ventures and you probably are one of the best gurus for that, knowing kind of a pulse on the nation and what's going on with the different clinics. So there's been a lot of, we deal with it every day. We talk about success and failure every day in our patient consultations. And so I really needed to know. I think Dr. Johnson did a great job of summarizing. We really need to know who's across the table. Patients do not want, they're very worried now after seeing Integramed fall apart locally here. Then, venture capital with OMA. I have great colleagues in another network locally here also having a lot of issues business-wise. That's hard for the doctor because the patients are coming for the trust of the doctor and the reputation of the doctor. This person can help me conceive and, have a baby. But they don't know what they're signing on with all the background, And I think patients should overall. They're starting to ask those questions. And so the independence is very simple to them. They get it, they understand it, and that simplicity, I think, really speaks to them because it's gotten too complex.
AIRE seems to have taken off really quickly. It wasn't that long ago that you emailed me saying, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Are there any folks that you might recommend for our advisory board? I connected you with a couple of folks, but that wasn't that long ago. And I think of other independent practice owners alliances, one that I'm not sure if they ever got off the ground or not, one probably 10 years ago that I think maybe they had done something, maybe they had some meetings, but most of the docs that I can think of that were affiliated with that ended up selling their practices. If this idea maybe didn't work in the past, why is the version that AIRE is approaching seeming to be steamrolling because you have so many people involved who all seem to be really passionate about just some of the names that I recognize: Dr. Sweldo, Dr. Siegel, Dr. Andrew Moore, Dr. Famuyiwa in the DC area. Why has this picked up so much steam so quickly, as far as you can tell?
I do think there is an inflection point, dare say a breaking point with corporate medicine in our field. And so I think it's taken off because people are recognizing that we probably have much more of a voice now than we did before. And they are seeing that everyone keeps saying, but you're just a little independent doc. So you don't really ultimately for a vendor, affect my bottom line. So I care more about the big names that we see. But I love that list that you released and you're about to re-release of all the different clinics and, what they're, how they're owned. I really did. I sat and I highlighted that list, and I said, I wanted to get a sense of how many are independent practices. It was at least 60%. You probably have those stats more, but there's a lot of independent doctors out there. So that is what I keep hearing from my colleagues who are actually not independents. They're like, I had no idea there were so many of you overall. And then you can see the gears are going. They're going, okay, so what are they doing? They seem happy. I'm happy-ish. What's happening that they seem to be just so fulfilled with what they're doing? Yes, we are an entity that is to help practices remain independent. Notice that one of our committees is succession. And I think that's a huge one is, fellows coming out, they don't really have a path to say, I would like to be in an independent practice. What is the avenue to talk to them, to, consider this, consider the why? And so the succession goes kind of both parts is for someone who's in their kind of more, I'm thinking about my retirements, and exit strategy. Is there a possibility to then hand over that baton to maybe a mid-career and then a new fellow coming out in the way that it used to be done, right? And is there a way to also do that maybe perhaps they're part of an alliance? I don't necessarily know if network is the right word, and we'll see how it evolves. This is meant to be pretty organic to see what our members need and what they'd like us to focus on. I will say, actually, the timing was incredible because I went to the Business and Medicine conference and Dr. Robbins said, are you aware that there's an IFP SIG now? And he goes, we just approved an independent fertility practices, ASRM special interest group. And I said, I wasn't. And this is exactly why conferences are so helpful. The timing of it was phenomenal. It's led by Dr. Mark Trollis and Dr. Ricardo Loretta Ramola. And, shout out to another Midwest doctor. And, it just happened to be that we're all putting this together. And I could not think of a better marriage, really, because that kind of helps with our organization and kind of the more formal part in for independent practices. And then AIRE is a trade association nonprofit, right? And so that helps us kind of then do perhaps more advocacy and kind of letting the group coalesce. So ASRM in Baltimore for us is going to be really cool and really key. And I know everyone, talks about Baltimore, but my oldest son, who's now turning 21, was born there. And, I think it's a fantastic city.
People need to shut up complaining about Baltimore. You sound like a bunch of rich snobs. I'm sorry, but we always talk on one side of our field about how we want to expand access to care. And then when we're not going to a resort in Palm Desert or we're going to Baltimore where real Americans live and that has had economic issues, it's more economically diverse, all of a sudden we have to go to Baltimore. Yeah. We have to go to Baltimore, and it's actually kind of nice. Stop complaining about Baltimore. Shout out to Dr. Gary Nakuda, who's from Baltimore.
Absolutely.
So you've got some timing that might be in destiny on your side, but is it also something about your approach that's different from approaches that were taken from independent practice owner associations in the past? Maybe you've got this angle on succession, and maybe that's part of the approach. Is there something about your approach that wasn't done correctly or wasn't attempted in the past?
Sure. I can't speak to what was done before, but I will say that for me, and what I really enjoy is connection and building relationships, period. And so the way we started this was I said, I put this out there. I reached out to you. You gave me three names, a couple names. I reached out to them. Shout out to Dr. Andrew Moore. Thank you. And I said, okay, let's get this going. This is an important part. Just as I was trying to put this together, I learned, and I'm going to move my hair so you can see this. I have a little pen. There was an independent organization called AIP, Alliance of Independent Physicians in St. Louis. I don't know if you can see the arch. And so that actually was a great footprint and blueprint for me because they were about 9 months ahead with this. So they said, this is how we did it. This is how we recruited. This is who we used to get the articles of incorporation. This is the kind of nonprofit that you want to be. And so those physicians, and I'm the only REI in it, it's really nice to connect with all the other subspecialties and specialties in our area. So I would say specifically for AIRE, the timing worked out because I'd been thinking about this now ever since I founded Arbor. And all of a sudden it was right in front of me that they were like, would you like to join the board? And, this is how we did it. So I would say that timing was important. But, I asked every independent REI, would you like to join? I know you're so busy. So this is more that you're providing your name and we'll see where this goes. And so not putting a lot of rules on it, I think has been very helpful. Now we will eventually, but we will do that as a group with consensus. That's a very important word in our field because it can be sometimes adversarial. Consensus, coalition, building together. I think we need to hear more of it.
Independent practices absolutely need collaboration, and they need collaboration from experts that can support them in different areas like genetics, because it's not just about the test, it's about what happens after the test. That's why so many fertility centers, including so many independently owned fertility centers, trust GeneScreen, because even the best teams miss stuff. In one study, 57% of fertility patients had genetic or family history risks that went unnoticed. And when those were found, 42% changed clinical care. In donor screening, nearly 1 in 5 were found ineligible after proper genetic review. That's the difference between confident care and costly gaps. GeneScreen gives your patients and your team what off-the-shelf testing can't. Expert genetic counseling that's seamless, scalable, and built to protect your program from risk. Find out why leading clinics, including leading independently owned fertility centers, are choosing GeneScreen. To learn more, visit genescreen.com or just Google GeneScreen. You'll find it, or ask me. What else did your coalition, your associate, your colleagues through AIRE want you to express to the audience?
3 points. Being an independent practice means lower costs, better clinical outcomes, and I'm happy to debate that. Because some people would say that, the networks, because they're standardized, have better clinical outcomes and higher physician satisfaction overall. Those are the 3 things that you get from an independent doctor that you may not get in a private equity or corporate owned entity.
Tell me more about that.
So I think the lower costs intuitively is the easiest to understand. There are less layers in our organization. There's less people who we have to get, buy-in from. And as we all know, you're running a successful business. Your people are usually the largest overhead, as they should be. So all our patients, when they ask, how is this going to be different? How do you run it differently? The question that I don't love, but it makes total sense because we do more affordable. Why are you so much more affordable? And part of it is the independence, is that there isn't going to be as many layers of people there that are overhead for us. There's just not. The decision making is agile. It's quick. We do a risk assessment based on cost, investment for the patient. Always, always, always patient outcomes is going to be an experience, is going to be the key to our decision making. And I think a lot of independent practices think that way. And there is a huge diversity in how they're structured, the decisions they make, how well they're doing from a numbers and P&L standpoint. And I think that diversity should be welcomed, because you can't take what we're doing here in Missouri and just copy and paste into California and New York. It just can't be done, But there are thriving practices in all those regions who are independent. And that's what I love about our board that you see, is that they're all over the country. overall, and they are doing it successfully. And kudos to them. I mean, you have to be a certain particular kind of doc to want to do that.
I don't think that point about cost is obvious. I think it's a direct affront to the claim that many private equity backed groups would make when buying a fertility center is we can help bring costs down because we'll have these efficiencies at scale. Are you saying that isn't how it plays out in real life?
I don't think so at all. One of the things that we dealt with OMA was that they didn't really want to explain it, but there was this line item on our P&Ls for each clinic where they essentially were kind of pulling money back. I think it's also because they knew it was kind of going under to fund themselves, you know. I think you would probably hear from a lot of individual doctors say that, you know, they'll all tell you when they were able to start paying themselves with the practice, right? Rarely is it going to be in the first year. But, you know, with this particular entity, they made the decision to do that because it was for them. Those are the type of things that we cannot control. And, you know, we are very mission oriented with lean better affordability, price transparency. It's an experiment. It really is. We're certainly not the first ones. You have had, you know, incredible doctors who've been doing this for a long time, CNY, Dr. Amos, who've been doing more affordable care. But over and over and over again, people ask, how are you doing this for better affordability? And my question to them is always, maybe you should be asking why they're charging so much. Because we report to SART, you know, we're still a fairly new practice, but we're reporting to SART. We have shown over and over and over again that, you know, we're investing in innovation and we are still going and doing well and are profitable. It's an experiment and it's so far so good. And I want to be very humble with the fact that for us personally and not my colleagues, you know, Dr. Tobler, all the practices that have been around for longer, they have been doing this for longer. And so I have a lot to learn. And I think a lot of independent practices have a lot to learn from each other. But I do think there are some things that when you have to run the practice with less revenue coming in because you have chosen to do so, it was very intentional for us because then we are very much better positioned to deal with economic instability, which it's palpable everywhere now, right? We can't ignore what's going on globally, politically, all the things. And that was a very intentional choice for us, is that, you know, if there starts to be an economic downturn, are we well positioned to be able to continue to not only survive, but thrive?
What would you want independent practice owners who haven't heard of AIRE yet to know?
At the moment, we have a very robust WhatsApp group. It really is in the nascent stages. I would say if you have any interest in joining and learning more, please reach out to some of the board of trustees, myself, Dr. Swaldo, Dr. Rips, Dr. Moore, Dr. Siegel, Dr. Abazi, Dr. Deng in Pacific Northwest, Dr. Copeland in North Carolina, Dr. Peng and Dr. Judy in Texas, and Dr. Sapantis and Dr. Famua in Maryland. She was actually one of my attendings when I was a resident. So shout out to another mentor. All of those people are going to be good overall ambassadors. But I would also like to share that, you know, this is very intentionally not super structured at the moment. We're going to come to ASRM. We're going to come together. We're going to talk about what we want to do. What is our first goal for year one? And then probably rolling out a bit more in terms of, you know, what investment, either your time, your resources, your funds, what will that look like? So no, there hasn't been a membership fee until now. We're at the point where we need to build a website. So now there's real costs coming into it. But at the moment, it's meant to be, let's come together first, see what's important. Let's support the SIG. So that would be the other thing. If you're interested and not sure, please come. I think they're going to release the date at ASRM for the IFP SIG soon. Please join us for that. And also please join us for what will be some version of a networking event for AIRE.
What is the cap table criteria for AIRE membership? Meaning, if they have venture capital backing, are they out? Some people have venture capital backing, but they aren't part of a network, or they've got, maybe it's not through a private equity firm, but they go through, they got limited partners somehow, but maybe they're not part of a network. Or does it have to be the physician's own 100% of the practice?
I think the physicians have to be the majority stakeholder and hence be the majority and primary decision maker. Simple kind of rubrics is, I have the founder of the local group always says, you'll know it when you see it. Okay, I get that. But, likely, do you have a boss is probably the best question to ask. I mean, I think ultimately we all do. I would say for us, it's our business advisors. So, I have a really great relationship with our CPA for that reason. But otherwise, if you don't really have to report all your ideas and decisions, then you're probably an independent practice overall. Are you able to control and see the flow of all the revenue in and out? Then yes, you're an independent, you're some version of an independent practice. So it's pretty simple. That was a great question because it invites folks who are primarily kind of running their own practice, but may have some help, right? And that help looks different for everyone. For us, it was a commercial lender. But if that help is someone who's an actual person who's helping you make decisions, well, also let's have a conversation. What does that look like? Because we want to be as inclusive as possible. But I think people also kind of will self-select a little bit. One thing that's come up was, what if you own your practice but not your lab? And actually, if you don't mind, Griffin, I will ask you, what do you think in that scenario overall? You own your practice, but you don't own your lab.
I don't know, man. So the reason why I'm partly at odds with that question is because Dr. Siegel made a pretty impassioned argument in favor of lab ownership by physicians here on the podcast, and I found it pretty persuasive. I also think that Doctors Neil Chappell and John Stormont of Fertility Answers in Louisiana are two extremely independently minded physicians who insist on their independence. They are an Ovation lab. They sold their lab to Ovation. And so I see their side of it too. So I don't have a good answer for you. Let me know what you decide. I'll be very interested into what you think.
I think we're a bit TBD. It's come up so far, and the consensus has been that if you're not controlling what's happening in your lab, since it's such an important part of a REI practice, you're probably not making all the decisions, at least with, some support from a team. And so I think for now, the owners own both their lab and the practice. But again, as I said, we need to evolve as we understand our colleagues overall and why they feel that they're really independent. And, that said, I have to give credit to our we just celebrated IVF Day, embryologists and lab directors who I really feel like are getting a voice. And we're very lucky to have an incredible relationship with our lab director. Shout out to Lisa Ray and our team. That I think is also going to be something that's different with this generation of REIs, is that they see that it's a much more collaborative, bit more equivalent, I would say, kind of, working together, compromise overall. So the days I think should be, gone where it's the doctor and they only see the doctor and the lab is behind the scenes. That doesn't work. They're absolute rock stars and magicians. I always say we're the supporting staff for our lab folks. So I think the independent practices give a nice star shine moment for the lab as well, which is nice to see.
We'll be continuing to cover what AIRE is doing and what you're doing, both at Arbor Fertility and your philosophy, Dr. Zarek, and we'll make sure to have some of your colleagues on so they can further share the message of AIRE. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm truly grateful for the opportunity.
Go to data.insidereproductivehealth.com. That's where we're compiling so much data on new technology in IVF, products and services, market analyses, info and mergers and acquisitions. Every data point that we can on the field writ large and the companies in the fertility field, we're compiling there. Go to data.insidereproductivehealth.com as we build that over time. And if your company isn't an IVF Heroes Universe sponsorship, your competitors are getting more visibility because we report on your category and we give that to your customers. We do that multiple times per year, and we do it around big events like ASRM and ASHRE. Go to data.insidereproductivehealth.com and submit your company today. Don't be left out.
Today's advertiser helped make the production and delivery of this episode possible for free to you. but the themes expressed by the guests do not necessarily reflect the views of Inside Reproductive Health nor of the advertiser. The advertiser does not have editorial control over the content of this episode, and the guest's appearance is not an endorsement of the advertiser. Thank you for listening to Inside Reproductive Health.